Chapter 1. The Temptation. Had been a long week. Work had been draining. My marriage felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and the last thing I wanted to do was face the silence that awaited me at home. Ethan, my husband, had become a stranger to me. The man I had married, the one who used to light up every room he walked into, had become distant, disconnected. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it was always about the mundane details. Bills, groceries, who was picking up the kids from school. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I still did in some way. But love, I had come to realize, wasn't always enough to keep a marriage alive. The spark we once had, the passion, had long since died out. And that's when I met Jason. Jason was a colleague I had known for a few months. He was new to the company and started working in the same department as me. He was charming, confident, and somehow, whenever he looked at me, it felt like I was the only person in the room. He knew exactly how to make me laugh, how to make me feel special, something that had been missing from my life for far too long. At first, I told myself it was harmless. A little flirtation, a few jokes, nothing to worry about. I had never been the type to act on impulses, especially not when I was married. But as the weeks passed, the harmless interactions grew more frequent. The compliments became more personal. I started looking forward to our conversations. And then one evening it happened. I was staying late at the office to finish a project, and Jason came by to drop off some papers. He lingered in my office longer than usual, and before I knew it, we were talking, really talking. I hadn't realized just how lonely I had been until he was there. His attention fully on me. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his voice low, a hint of something more in his tone. I laughed it off, unsure how to respond. "Thanks, Jason. I'm just trying to finish this project." But he didn't laugh. He just stared at me with those intense blue eyes of his, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt noticed. Really noticed. "I'm serious," he said, stepping a little closer to my desk. "You've always been beautiful. You just don't realize it." My heart raced in my chest. There it was, the line that shouldn't be crossed. And yet I didn't pull away. Something inside me, something dark and desperate, made me stay rooted to the spot. I couldn't deny the pull between us. The chemistry was undeniable. My mind told me to stop, to step back, but my body didn't listen. Before I knew it, Jason's lips were on mine, soft and urgent, and the world around us disappeared. There was no guilt, no thoughts of Ethan. There was only Jason, his touch, and the overwhelming need for something, anything to feel alive again. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding. Jason's eyes were full of fire, and for a moment I thought he might say something that would make it all feel like a bad decision. But instead he just smiled, his lips still tingling with the kiss we'd shared. "This doesn't have to be a one-time thing," he said, his voice hushed, full of promise. And in that moment I made a choice that would change everything. Chapter 2. The first step into darkness. The days following that kiss were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's face, felt his hands on my skin. I had always been a person who prided herself on being in control, but that kiss, that moment of weakness, had completely unraveled me. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, to focus on my responsibilities at work, at home. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. At night, I would lie in bed beside Ethan, feeling the distance between us. His snoring was the only sound in the room, the only proof that he was still there. We hadn't made love in months, maybe even longer. We barely talked anymore. I missed him, I really did, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he had already checked out of our marriage long before I had. And then there was Jason. He was so alive, so full of energy. When he looked at me, it felt like I mattered, like I was more than just a wife, a mother, a colleague. I was me again. It was intoxicating, and it made everything else, everything that was supposed to matter, seem insignificant. I couldn't help myself. The temptation gnawed at me, pulling me toward him. Every time I saw him at work, it was like a magnetic force drew us together. We would find excuses to talk, to share quiet moments. And every time, the chemistry between us would escalate just a little bit more. His touches lingered a little longer. His words a little more suggestive. And I was too weak to stop it. One afternoon I found myself in his office. He had called me in to go over some work details, but we both knew it wasn't about the work anymore. There was an electricity in the air, a palpable tension that neither of us could deny. He closed the door behind me and locked it. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, my voice shaky as I felt the heat rise in my chest. Jason smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile that held secrets, that promised more than just what we had already shared. "We don't have to stop," he said softly, stepping closer. "You know you want this as much as I do." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, caught between the guilt that threatened to overwhelm me and the desire that burned through my veins. Jason cupped my face gently in his hands, his eyes locking with mine. "You're not the only one who feels this way, Lena. You've been unhappy for a while. Can see it. Can feel it. And I can give you what you're missing." I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was as if he could see right through me, could see the emptiness I had been trying to fill for so long. He was right, I was unhappy. I was craving something I couldn't name, something I had lost along the way. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that in this moment, with him standing so close, my heart racing, I didn't want to stop. And then, without another word, he kissed me again. Only this time there was no hesitation, no questioning. It was urgent, hungry, desperate. I knew it was wrong. I knew that I was betraying Ethan, betraying everything I had ever stood for. But in that moment I didn't care. I didn't care about anything but the fire that was igniting inside me. His hands were all over me, and I couldn't pull away. Every touch, every kiss, was a reminder of the passion I had been missing for so long. It felt like I was waking up from a deep, endless slumber, like I had been sleepwalking through my own life. And Jason was the one who had awakened me. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless. A mix of regret and desire swirled within me. But Jason was smiling, his eyes filled with satisfaction. "I told you, Lena. We don't have to stop." I knew he was right. I couldn't stop now. I had already crossed the line. And deep down I was too far gone to turn back. Chapter 3 continued the spiral. After that kiss, everything changed. The boundaries I had once held so tightly were gone, shattered by my own desire. I should have walked away, I should have ended it, but something inside me was begging for more. More of Jason. More of the feeling that I had somehow vanished from my life, the one that seemed to exist only when I was with him. I would go home to Ethan every night, and everything felt like it was in slow motion. He would kiss me on the cheek, ask how my day went, and we'd talk about the kids or the bills or whatever was happening around us. But with every word he spoke, I could hear the dullness in my voice. We had both been so numb to each other for so long that it was almost like we were just coexisting, roommates sharing space instead of a married couple sharing a life. And then there was Jason. Every time we passed each other in the hallway, our gazes would lock, and in that instant I would feel that same spark. It was always the same, intense, almost magnetic. His presence was like an addiction I couldn't shake. His words replayed in my mind. "I think you're finally waking up," and I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified by the truth in them. Maybe I had been asleep for years, buried beneath the weight of responsibilities and expectations. That night, I lay awake in bed, Ethan's breathing deep and even beside me. His arm was draped lazily over me, and for a moment I wanted to pull away. I wanted to roll over and reach for my phone, to text Jason, to see him, to feel something that made me feel alive. But then I remembered the warmth of Ethan's embrace, his quiet steadiness, the comfort he brought in the silence. But that wasn't enough anymore, was it? I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I had never been the type of person to do something like this. Cheating wasn't in my nature. But somehow, here I was with a man I barely knew, someone who had awakened parts of me I had forgotten about, who made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what I was hoping for, what I expected from this affair. Was it just an escape from the emptiness? Or was I looking for something deeper, something that couldn't be fixed with a few stolen kisses and promises that we both knew weren't real? The next morning I woke up with a headache. The late-night thoughts had kept me up, tossing and turning in bed. Ethan was already gone when I opened my eyes, the sound of his car leaving for work echoing in the driveway. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and immediately reached for my phone. There was a text from Jason. "Good morning, beautiful. Thinking of you." I felt a smile tug at the corners of my lips, and despite everything, my heart fluttered. How many years had it been since someone made me feel this way? How many years since I had felt wanted? I quickly typed a reply, my fingers trembling with excitement, my conscience already whispering warnings that I tried to ignore. "Morning, Jason. I can't stop thinking about last night." Before I could second-guess myself, my phone buzzed with his reply. "You're irresistible. I don't think you realize just how much you're driving me crazy." Felt like the world was narrowing to just the two of us. In that moment, I wasn't someone's wife. I wasn't a mother. I was just Lena, desired, wanted, alive. The doorbell rang. I quickly shoved my phone under my pillow, panic rising in my chest. Who could that be this early? When I opened the door, I was greeted by the delivery man holding a bouquet of roses. The note attached simply said, "For the woman who's always on my mind." I blinked, confused. From Jason. I wondered, though it didn't say. But in my gut I knew it was him. Only he would do something like this. He was bold, unashamed, and he wanted me to know he was thinking of me. I placed the bouquet on the kitchen counter, staring at it for a moment longer than I should have. Then, as if caught in a trance, I sent a quick message to Jason. "You didn't have to do that." His response was instant. "But I wanted to. I want to show you how much I care about you." I stared at the phone, a mix of guilt and excitement battling inside me. Ethan had never done something like this for me. We hadn't been us for so long that I had forgotten how it felt to be cared for like this. But at the same time I knew how wrong this was. How much damage I was causing. I went through the motions of the day, preparing meals, picking up the kids from school, helping them with their homework. But all the while, my mind kept returning to Jason, to the roses, to his words. At night, after the kids had gone to bed, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. Was I the same woman who had vowed to love and cherish Ethan, no matter what? Who was I now? I heard the front door open, and Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts. "Hey babe, how was your day?" He was standing in the doorway, smiling, his hands carrying a bag of takeout from our favorite restaurant. I forced a smile and nodded. "It was good. Just busy." His eyes softened. "I know it's been tough lately. But I'm here. You're not alone in this." But I felt alone. I felt like the distance between us had grown so wide that I couldn't even reach him anymore. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to fix it. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Ethan turned toward me, pulling me into his arms. His warmth felt like a comfort, but his touch felt like a ghost of what it once was. I wanted to respond, to kiss him back, to feel something, anything. But all I could think of was Jason, the memory of his lips on mine, the sound of his voice whispering promises of passion. As I lay there in the silence, the choice before me was clearer than ever. I was already in too deep, and I had no idea how far I was willing to go. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. The next few days passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. At work, Jason and I grew closer. Our stolen moments filled with whispers, lingering touches, and electric exchanges that seemed to crackle in the air whenever we were near each other. The lines between right and wrong blurred further, and with each passing moment, the pull to him grew stronger. I couldn't deny that I was falling deeper into this affair, this dangerous game of deceit. At home, things between Ethan and me were becoming more strained. The silence that hung between us had grown almost unbearable. He tried to reach out, trying to hold me, to kiss me, but it all felt like an echo of something that was long gone. We were two strangers in the same bed, pretending we were still connected. I began to notice the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. His work schedule had gotten more demanding, and when he was home, he seemed distracted. There were no more romantic dinners, no more of the small gestures that once made me feel cherished. I should have been upset about it, I should have wanted to confront him, but instead, all I could think about was Jason. It was a Friday evening when everything began to unravel. I had just finished a long meeting at work, my mind already racing with thoughts of Jason. I couldn't wait for the weekend to be over so I could see him again. But as I was about to head out of the office, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Ethan. "I know something's been off lately, Lena. We need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected this. I had been avoiding confronting the issues in our marriage, but now it seemed like I was being backed into a corner. The guilt crept in, but it was quickly overshadowed by the rush of excitement that came with seeing Jason later that night. I quickly typed a reply, pretending everything was fine. "I'm just tired, Ethan. It's been a long week. We'll talk when I get home, okay?" His response was quick but terse. "Fine. But we need to. I can't keep pretending either." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. The tension between us had been building for months, and part of me was relieved he was finally acknowledging it. But the other part of me, the part that was wrapped up in Jason, couldn't focus on anything but the idea of seeing him. As I left the office, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Guilt, anticipation, fear, and longing. When I got home, Ethan was sitting on the couch, waiting for me. His eyes were tired, dark circles under them. He had clearly been waiting for me, hoping I would be there to talk. I tried to muster a smile as I walked in, but it felt like the mask was slipping. "Hey," I said, sitting beside him. I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes studied me, almost as if he was looking for something. An explanation, a sign that things could go back to the way they were. But I had nothing to offer. "We need to talk, Lena," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of something heavy. "About us. About what's been going on. I feel like I don't know you anymore." His words stung more than I expected, a sharp reminder of how far apart we had drifted. He was right. We had been strangers for so long that it felt like we were trying to rebuild something that had already been broken beyond repair. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I wanted to apologize, to tell him how sorry I was for everything that had gone wrong. But how could I? How could I admit to him that I had been seeking attention elsewhere, that I had fallen into the arms of another man, someone who made me feel alive again? "I don't know how to fix this, Ethan," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can anymore." His face softened, and for a moment, I saw the man I had once loved so deeply. He reached for my hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "I'm still here, Lena. But I can't keep doing this if you're not. I need to know if you're still in this with me, or if we're just going through the motions." I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to confess everything. How I had cheated, how I had been hiding a part of myself that I didn't even recognize anymore. But before I could open my mouth, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen, my heart leaping into my throat. It was a message from Jason. "Can't stop thinking about you. I need to see you tonight." It was like a jolt of electricity, a rush that made everything else disappear. My heart pounded as I stared at the message, my fingers frozen above the screen. Ethan noticed my hesitation, his eyes narrowing. "Who was that?" His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that told me he already suspected something wasn't right. I hesitated. Should I lie? Should I tell him the truth? But before I could answer, I heard Jason's name in my mind, louder than anything Ethan could say. I knew I was already too deep. I had crossed a line that I couldn't uncross. "I need some time alone," I said, standing up abruptly. The words felt foreign coming from my mouth, but I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. Ethan looked hurt, confused, but he didn't say anything as I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door. I barely registered the sound of his voice calling my name, asking me to stay. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to Jason. The moment I stepped outside, I could feel the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had made my choice. There was no going back. I arrived at Jason's apartment, my hands shaking as I knocked on the door. When he opened it, his eyes were full of fire, full of desire, and in that moment, all the guilt I had been carrying seemed to fade away. "You came," he whispered, stepping aside to let me in. And as the door closed behind me, I knew that I was about to lose everything. Chapter 5: The Breaking Point. The door clicked shut behind me, and for a split second everything went still. Jason's apartment was dimly lit, the soft glow of lamps casting shadows across the room. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, but it felt different now. More desperate, more urgent. I could hear my own breath, shallow and uneven, matching the erratic beating of my heart. Jason stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. "You came," he said again, his voice low, filled with something that both excited and terrified me. I nodded, my throat dry, trying to make sense of what was happening. What had I done? What had I become? But as his hand touched my arm, I was reminded of how easy it was to forget all of that. To forget the guilt, the consequences, the marriage that was slowly slipping away. All I could think about was the need for him, need for this. It was all consuming. I should have stopped it. I should have turned around and gone back home to Ethan, to the man who had stood by me for years, to the life we had built together. But I didn't. Couldn't. Because in this moment, with Jason's lips hovering just inches from mine, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in so long. And for a brief moment, I didn't care about the damage I was causing, the lies I was living. Jason reached for my hand, pulling me toward him, and I went without resistance. His touch was like fire, burning through my skin, igniting a spark inside me that I hadn't known was there. I had been numb for so long, but now I was awake. And it felt dangerous in the most intoxicating way. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The tension between us had already said everything that needed to be said. It was the kind of passion that didn't require words, just raw, unfiltered desire. His hands moved to my back, pulling me closer, and I could feel his body press against mine, hot and urgent. But as his lips met mine, something shifted. The sweetness of the kiss turned into something darker, more demanding. Jason's hand slipped under my shirt, his fingertips grazing my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. For a moment I closed my eyes, allowing myself to get lost in the moment, to forget everything else. But then, heard it. The sound of my phone buzzing on the table. The world seemed to snap back into focus. The sharp reality of the situation cut through the haze of desire. I pulled away from him, my breath ragged, and for the first time since I had entered the apartment, I felt a flicker of doubt. "Don't stop now," Jason whispered, his lips trailing along my neck, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was doing something irreversible, something that I might regret forever. I pulled back, shaking my head, my mind spinning. I need to check my phone," I said, my voice a whisper of its former self. Jason stepped back, his expression darkening, but he didn't push me. He simply watched as I reached for my phone, my hand trembling. When I looked at the screen, my heart nearly stopped. It was a message from Ethan. "Where are you? We need to talk. Please come home. I love you." The words hit me like a slap to the face. I had left him. I had walked away from everything. And now, here I was with Jason, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I stared at the message, my mind racing. What was I doing? What had I become? But Jason didn't give me time to think. He stepped closer again, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder, his touch warm and familiar. "You don't have to go back, Lena," he said softly, his voice like silk. "You don't owe him anything. You owe yourself this freedom. Don't you want to feel wanted? Don't you want to feel alive?" His words were like poison, sweet and toxic all at once. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to forget the life I had, to live in this moment with him. But the other part, the part of me that still cared about Ethan, that still cared about what I had torn apart, was screaming at me to leave, to go back home before it was too late. I can't, I said, shaking my head as the weight of Ethan's words pressed down on me. I needed to go back. Had to fix this. But even as I thought that, I couldn't ignore the pull I felt toward Jason. Then why are you still here? Jason's voice was colder now, his patience wearing thin. He grabbed my wrist, his grip tight but not painful, and led me toward the couch. You're already here, Lena. You've already made your choice. Don't fight it anymore. I hesitated, my body stiff with indecision. I knew I was about to make a choice that would change everything. But what choice? I could feel the weight of Ethan's love, his trust, slipping through my fingers, and I knew that once I crossed this line with Jason, there was no going back. But part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to lose myself completely, to surrender to the passion, to let the guilt fall away. Lena. Jason's voice broke through my thoughts again, this time with a sense of urgency. Stop thinking. Just feel. He was right. I had spent so long thinking, rationalizing, analyzing every move I made. But right now, all I could feel was the heat between us, the electricity sparking with every touch. And in that moment, all I wanted was to forget everything else. But as I stood there, torn between the man I had once loved and the man I was now falling for, I realized something. I was already losing myself. I was already losing everything I cared about. And yet, the choice wasn't as simple as it seemed. Because deep down I knew, once I gave myself to Jason, it would be the end of everything. My marriage, my life. And even though I was scared, a part of me couldn't wait for it to be over. Chapter 6. The consequence. I felt like I was suspended between two worlds, one where I had built a life with Ethan, a life that held the weight of years, of promises made, of children born. And then there was this new world, this wild and intoxicating world with Jason, a world where my desires were finally being seen, where the passion was raw and unrelenting. I was standing on the precipice, looking down at both futures, unsure which one would pull me under. Jason was watching me closely, his eyes intense, his lips parted slightly, as if waiting for me to make the next move. I could feel the tension between us, thick and heavy, suffocating almost. My pulse raced in my ears as I stared at him, my mind spinning. But I couldn't deny the pull, the yearning inside me to just give in. To be with him, to feel the exhilaration that came with surrendering to something new. He stepped closer again, his breath warm against my ear. You don't need to think about him, Jason murmured, his voice coaxing, his fingers brushing my arm. You're here now. You want this. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words press against me like a physical force. How could I want this? How could I want to tear everything down, to destroy the man who loved me, who had been my rock for so long? How could I betray him so fully, so completely? But before I could stop myself, I found myself nodding, just barely, giving in to the desire. I had already crossed the threshold. There was no going back. My lips parted, and the air around us thickened. Jason's lips met mine once again, hard and hungry, and I kissed him back with everything I had, my hands pulling him closer, as if I could erase the entire world around us with this single kiss. For a few minutes I forgot. I forgot about Ethan. I forgot about everything that was waiting for me outside this apartment, outside this moment. I lost myself in Jason's touch, in the way he made me feel powerful, wanted, desired in ways I had never felt before. But with each passing second, the reality of what I was doing started to creep back into my mind. Jason was pulling at my clothes now, his hands moving with a desperate urgency. And part of me wanted to keep going, to give in completely. But another part of me, the part that had known Ethan for years, the part that had promised to love him and only him, was screaming in my head, telling me to stop, to remember who I was betraying. I pulled away from Jason, breathing heavily, my chest rising and falling with each frantic breath. Wait, Jason, I said, my voice trembling. I can't keep doing this. Jason looked at me, his brow furrowed, his chest rising and falling as well, though with a different kind of impatience. What do you mean? You came here for a reason, Lena. You wanted this. I know, I ran a hand through my hair trying to steady myself, but my mind was a whirlwind. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I can keep betraying Ethan. Jason's expression darkened. He stepped back, his jaw tightening as if he were trying to hide his frustration. Ethan doesn't deserve you. He hasn't been there for you. He hasn't given you what you need. You're just lying to yourself if you think you're not better off with me. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. They were cruel, but they were also true in a way. Ethan hadn't been there for me in a long time. He hadn't seen me. He hadn't touched me the way Jason had. Jason had awakened something inside me that I thought had been long gone. But there was more to love than just passion. There was history, memories, commitment, shared responsibility. Ethan might have been distant, but I couldn't erase the years we had spent building our life together. I'm not like you, Jason, I whispered, the weight of my guilt finally crashing over me. I don't just give up on people. Jason's face softened for a moment, but only for a moment. I'm not asking you to give up on Ethan. I'm asking you to think about yourself for once. Don't you deserve more than what you have? I stood there, frozen in place, the weight of his words hanging in the air between us. I thought of Ethan, of his kind eyes, his quiet love. And I thought of Jason, of how he made me feel alive, of the raw passion we shared. But I knew deep down that this wasn't the answer. This wasn't what I needed. I need to go home, I said, my voice firm now. I need to fix what I've broken. Jason didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at me, his eyes cold, almost accusing. You can't go back, Lena. You've already made your choice. And if you walk out that door, there's no coming back. The finality in his words hit me like a wave, crashing over me, drowning me in the realization that once I walked out of that door, I couldn't unsee what I had done. I had already crossed a line, already betrayed Ethan in ways that could never be taken back. And no matter what happened, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking, but it felt like too little too late. I grabbed my jacket and rushed to the door, my hands shaking as I twisted the handle. Behind me I heard Jason's voice, low and bitter, calling out my name. Don't come back to me when you realize you've lost everything. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. As I stepped out into the night, the cool air hit my face, and I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my affair. It was the beginning of something far worse. The consequences of what I had done were just beginning to unravel. And they would be far more painful than I could ever have imagined. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The drive home felt like an eternity, each passing minute stretching longer than the last. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and my heart thudded painfully in my chest. What had I done? What had I allowed myself to become? The night was cold and quiet, the streets lit by the soft glow of street lamps, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. I didn't want to go home, didn't want to face Ethan and explain what I had done. How could I? How could I even begin to apologize for the betrayal, for the lies I had spun, for the intimacy I had shared with another man? As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the light in the living room window. Ethan was home, waiting for me. I could feel the weight of his love, his patience, pressing down on me like a lead blanket. He didn't deserve any of this. He didn't deserve me walking back through that door, knowing full well that I had just destroyed everything we had worked so hard to build. I sat in the car for a moment, just staring at the house. It looked so familiar, so normal, and yet it felt like a prison. The life I had built with Ethan now felt like a shadow, a version of myself that I could never return to. I had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone, no matter how many apologies I gave. Eventually I forced myself out of the car. My legs felt heavy as I walked toward the front door. I knew what was waiting inside. I knew the questions, the pain in Ethan's eyes that I would have to face. But I also knew that I didn't deserve his love anymore. When I opened the door, Ethan was sitting on the couch, just like he had been earlier. He looked up at me, his expression tired but hopeful. "Lena," he whispered, his voice soft, as if unsure whether to embrace me or let me go. "I'm home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt hollow, empty in my mouth. Ethan stood up slowly, his eyes searching mine, trying to find the person he had known, the woman he had married, the woman he had loved. But I wasn't her anymore. I didn't know who I was. He stepped toward me, his arms outstretched as if to pull me into a hug, but I didn't move. Couldn't. The shame was too much. The guilt clawed at me, suffocating me. I started, but my voice cracked and I had to stop. I didn't know how to tell him. I didn't know how to confess what I had done, what I had allowed myself to become. "I know," he said, his voice steady but filled with sadness. "I know something's wrong, Lena. I can feel it." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "Ethan, My throat closed up and I couldn't get the words out. The confession felt impossible, like I was drowning in the enormity of what I had done. "You don't have to say it," he said softly, his voice full of quiet resignation. "I can see it in your eyes. You've already made your choice." His words hit me like a punch. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice cracking. "It's not like that. It's just..." I stopped because there was no excuse. How could I explain to him what I had done? How could I explain that in a moment of weakness, in a moment where I felt invisible, I had betrayed him with another man? How could I explain that I had let Jason make me feel special, make me feel alive, when all I had done was destroy everything we had? Ethan sighed, his shoulders slumping as he sat back down on the couch, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to know this, Lena," he said, his voice low. "I didn't want to have to face the truth." I could see the hurt in his eyes, but there was something else there too, something I hadn't expected. There was anger. Anger not just at what I had done, but at the betrayal of trust, at the shattering of everything we had built. "I never meant for this to happen," I whispered, taking a step toward him, but he didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, the pain too deep for words. "You've already broken my trust," he said quietly. "And that's something I can't fix, no matter how much I want to." I stood frozen in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in my own life. I wanted to say more, to apologize, to try and explain myself, but I knew it was too late. The words wouldn't make a difference now. I had shattered us. There was no going back from this. Ethan finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Lena. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." The words hit me like a slap, a truth I had been avoiding. I could feel the finality of them, the quiet death of our marriage. The pain of knowing that I had destroyed something so precious, something that had once meant everything to both of us, was almost unbearable. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling like nothing more than empty syllables. They weren't enough. They would never be enough. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. He didn't look at me as he walked past, heading toward the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I'm leaving," he said quietly, his voice cold, distant. "I don't know if I can stay here anymore. I don't know if I can share this space with you when you've already given yourself to someone else." He didn't look back as he opened the door and stepped outside. The sound of the door closing echoed through the silence of the house, leaving me standing alone in the hallway, my heart in pieces. I had lost him. I had lost everything. Chapter 8. The Silence. The house was eerily quiet after Ethan left. The kind of quiet that settles in your bones and makes you acutely aware of every single sound. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft whoosh of the air conditioning. It was like the world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. But I couldn't. I couldn't do anything but sit in the middle of the living room, my hands curled tightly in my lap, staring at the empty space where Ethan had been. The sofa still had the imprint of his body, the space where his warmth had been. But now it was just a cold, vacant shell, like everything else in my life had become in the past few hours. I had destroyed everything. My mind raced through the moments of the past weeks. The moments when I had felt the distance growing between Ethan and me, the little cracks that had begun to appear in the foundation of our marriage. But I couldn't just blame him. Well, I was the one who had allowed myself to stray. I had opened the door to Jason, to temptation, and I had walked through it willingly. I couldn't stop thinking about the look in Ethan's eyes when he said he wasn't sure if he could ever forgive me. That look, the hurt, the betrayal, the sadness, was etched into my mind. It was all I could see when I closed my eyes. I tried to push those thoughts aside, to tell myself that I could fix this, that I could apologize, explain, make things right. But deep down I knew I was lying to myself. The truth was, Ethan was gone, and he wasn't just physically absent. He was gone emotionally, mentally, and the worst part was, I had pushed him to that point. I glanced at my phone lying on the coffee table. Ethan's number was still in my contacts. His name still lit up under favorites. Could reach out. I could beg him to come back. But the words didn't come. Every time I thought about it, my throat tightened, the weight of the decision bearing down on me. What was there to say? What could I say that would undo what I had done? I stood up, my legs weak, and walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge, stared at the half-empty bottles of wine, the leftovers from dinner we had shared the night before, when everything had seemed normal. The night before everything had shattered. I grabbed a bottle of wine, unscrewed the cap, and poured myself a glass. The cool liquid slid down my throat, offering a brief moment of comfort. I leaned back against the counter, staring at nothing in particular. The wine wasn't enough. It wouldn't numb the guilt or the heartbreak, but it was something, anything, to dull the pain for just a second. I thought about Jason, about how everything with him had felt so easy. The chemistry had been undeniable, the attraction instant. With him, I felt seen, wanted, desired in ways that Ethan hadn't made me feel in years. But that didn't excuse what I had done. It didn't erase the fact that I had cheated, that I had betrayed the man who had loved me unconditionally. I thought about what Jason had said before I left, his words haunting me. "You've already made your choice." What did that even mean? Was he expecting me to leave Ethan for him? Was he going to be the one to pick up the broken pieces of my life? My phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. I grabbed it, almost afraid of who it might be. It was a text message from Jason. "You left. I thought you wanted something real. What's the point of playing this game?" My heart sank as I read his words. They were filled with frustration and confusion, and I couldn't blame him. He had thought I was serious. He had thought I was ready to leave everything behind for him, for the chance at something new, something exciting. I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. Jason didn't understand the gravity of what I had done. He didn't understand that I couldn't just pick up and walk away from my life with Ethan. It wasn't that simple. It wasn't just about passion and desire. It was about love, loyalty, and the years we had spent building something together. But as much as I wanted to explain that to him, I knew deep down that I had already made my decision. The moment I allowed myself to kiss Jason, to feel wanted by him, I had chosen a different path. And no matter how much I tried to go back, no matter how much I wanted to repair the damage, the truth was, Ethan wasn't coming back. And neither was I. I hit reply. But the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I couldn't even understand myself? I set the phone down, my hand trembling as I brought the glass of wine to my lips again, letting the sharp taste fill my mouth. I needed something to drown the guilt, the shame, the overwhelming feeling of loss that seemed to consume me. But nothing could numb this. Nothing could fix what I had broken. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I might not deserve fixing. Chapter 9. The consequences unfold. The morning after Ethan left felt like a fog had settled over everything. The sun was barely rising, casting pale light through the blinds, but I felt like I was still trapped in the night before, in that dark, painful moment when everything began to unravel. The house seemed even quieter now, emptier. The walls, once filled with laughter and shared memories, now felt suffocating, pressing down on me as if the house itself was mourning the loss. I had spent the night in a restless, tear-filled sleep, tossing and turning, only to wake up with a heart still heavy and a mind still clouded by guilt. There was no peace, no escape. It was as if I could feel the consequences of my actions pressing down on me from all sides. I glanced at my phone, still lying on the counter from the night before. Jason's message was still there, and my heart lurched again as I thought about how he had accused me of playing games. But was he right? Had I been playing games all along? Was that all it had been? My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. This time it was from Ethan. "I'm at the apartment. I need to get my things." My stomach dropped. The finality in his words was unmistakable. He wasn't just taking a break. He wasn't just angry. He was done. I quickly replied, my fingers trembling as I typed. "Okay. I'll be there soon." I stood up, my legs shaking as I walked to the bathroom, my reflection in the mirror almost unrecognizable. My eyes were red, puffy from crying, my hair a tangled mess. I looked like someone who had been through a war, someone who had lost everything and was still trying to figure out how to survive in the aftermath. The drive to our apartment felt like another eternity, each second stretching longer than the last. I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know how Ethan would react, what he would say. Would he be angry? Would he yell at me? Or was he beyond that, beyond even caring about me anymore? When I pulled into the parking lot and saw his car, a wave of nausea hit me. This was it. This was the moment I would have to face the consequences of my actions. I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I didn't have a choice. Ethan was already standing by the front door when I got there. His back to me, his shoulders stiff. He looked like a man who had already made up his mind, someone who had accepted that this was the end. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, but when he turned to look at me, I felt like the air was knocked out of me. His eyes were hollow, the warmth that had once been there replaced with a cold, unrecognizable stare. He was no longer the man I had known. He was a stranger. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "Please." He held up a hand, stopping me before I could say anything else. "Lena, I don't want to hear it. I've already heard enough. I'm done." The words felt like a slap, each one hitting harder than the last. I tried to reach out, but he stepped back, his eyes hardening. "You made your choice. And now so have I." I felt like I was going to collapse, right there on the floor in front of him. The weight of his words crushed me, the pain of knowing that everything was slipping away. I had always thought that no matter what, we would make it through together. But I was wrong. This wasn't something we could fix. "Ethan, please," I begged, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe sadness, but it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. "You don't get it, Lena," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just what you did. It's how you did it. The lies, the deceit. It's like you weren't even thinking about me, about us. You were thinking about yourself. You were thinking about what you wanted. And I can't live with that." I stepped forward, desperate, but he shook his head and backed away. "I need to get my things, Lena. I need to leave." I couldn't even answer. There was nothing I could say that would make this better. Nothing that would undo the damage I had caused. I could feel the finality of it in my bones, the crushing weight of everything I had broken. I had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and now there was no way back. As he began to pack up his things, I stood there, frozen, watching him move through our apartment, taking pieces of our life with him. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, the memories that were once ours, they all felt like strangers now. All I had left was the wreckage of something I had destroyed. Ethan didn't look at me again as he carried his bags to the door. When he was done, he turned to me one last time. His expression empty, unreadable. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Lena," he said, his voice quiet, almost resigned. But I can't be a part of it. Not anymore. And with that, he turned and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind him was the final nail in the coffin. I was alone. And I knew that I had lost everything. Chapter 10. A Bitter Awakening. The apartment was now empty. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the space around me, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down harder than ever before. The air felt cold, distant, as though everything I had known had slipped away like sand through my fingers. I tried to breathe, to steady myself, but it was impossible. The reality of it all was too overwhelming, and I felt like I was suffocating in it. Ethan was gone. He was never coming back. The man I had loved for years, the one I thought I could never hurt, was now nothing more than a memory. My phone buzzed again, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at it hesitantly, almost afraid to see what message awaited me. But when I saw the name on the screen, I froze. Jason. I had forgotten about him. Forgotten about the one who had, in the heat of a fleeting moment, made me feel like I was something more than the woman I had become. The woman who had ruined everything. I opened the message, my fingers trembling. I don't want to be the one to fix your broken marriage, Lena. But if you really want to make it work, you need to stop hiding from the truth. Stop running. I'm done trying to make this easy. His words were sharp, direct, and I knew exactly what he was saying. He was done. He had made it clear in his messages, and now it was confirmed. Jason wasn't the solution to my problems. He was just another distraction, another mistake that I had allowed to cloud my judgment. I stared at the screen, the message sinking in. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about me, about who I had become. I wasn't the person I used to be. I wasn't the woman who stood beside Ethan, the woman who made promises and kept them. No, I had become someone else, someone I didn't even recognize. For a long moment, I simply stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I thought about Ethan's words, the finality in his tone when he said he was done. I thought about how he had looked at me, not with love, but with a quiet sadness, as though he was already mourning the loss of something that had once been beautiful. I had lost him, and no matter how much I regretted it, no matter how much I wished I could undo what I had done, the truth was, I couldn't. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. I sat down on the couch, my hands shaking as I held my phone in my lap. The tears came again, but this time I didn't fight them. I let them fall, letting the grief pour out of me. I had made my choices. I had allowed myself to slip away from Ethan, to get caught up in the lies and the temptation. I had hurt the one person who had always been there for me, the one person who had trusted me completely. And in doing so, I had lost not just him but myself. But even in my grief, even in the crushing weight of my mistakes, something inside me began to shift. I realized that the road I had been on, the one filled with lies, betrayal, and selfishness, was not the one I wanted to continue down. I couldn't fix what I had done with Ethan, but I could fix myself. It was going to take time, and it wasn't going to be easy. But I had to start somewhere. I had to confront the woman I had become and find a way to heal, even if it meant being alone for a while. I wiped my tears, feeling the sting of my own actions, but also feeling something else, a sense of clarity. This was the price I had to pay. This was the consequence of my choices. And maybe, just maybe, it was a price I deserved.